Hello everyone, my name is Claire Bradford I'm with the Facilitating the Lightbulb Moments podcast with supplemental instruction. My co-host Victoria is out today because of sickness, but I'm joined with Sarah Dean, the Assistant Director of Supplemental Instruction, as well as Dr. Harrison, Dr. Moore, and Dr. Kitchings. Just to start off, we're going to do introductions just for the audience to meet everyone. Why don't you start, Sarah, and introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, hi. My name is Sarah Dean. I'm the Assistant Director for Supplemental Instruction. I've been working with supplemental instruction in the administrative capacity since spring of 2016. And I was a facilitator for about 4 years in undergrad, starting in fall 2007, kind of up through 2011. So most of my adult life has been spent in SI and working with college students. I love it. And I'm so excited to join the podcast. Yay.
Dr. Kitchings, why don't you start us off with introducing the professors?
My name is Clay Kitchings, and this is my 6th year at the University of North Georgia. I'm an assistant professor of mathematics, and also in my first year serving as assistant dean in the College of Science and Mathematics. I am very passionate about teaching and learning mathematics. I get great satisfaction from witnessing students learn and progress through their challenging mathematics content. I've partnered with several colleges in our institution and departments, including Department of Learning Support, the College of Education, and I've advised students in computer science. I have worked with several departments. I got my bachelor's, master's, and doctorate in mathematics education. So I've studied mathematics and education together as a whole for my entire career. I spent several years teaching grades 7 through 12 in public schools in Georgia and private school once or twice. I've also supervised student teachers in those settings, so I have a lot of experience working with prospective teachers of mathematics. I'm a firm believer in growth mindset and the power that promises for students if they really tap into that and if we can win them over to that. I'm very excited to work with the supplemental instructor facilitators at UNG. That's a highlight for me, and I hope to see more partnerships and more facilitators with more UNG faculty in the future. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, Dr. Moore, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Miriam Moore, and I teach English as well as upper division linguistics classes on the Gainesville campus. I have been at UNG now. I'm in my 5th year. I came after teaching at community colleges and working primarily with English as a second language multilingual students, which is my passion. I have my PhD in linguistics with a focus on language acquisition and second language acquisition studies. So I am really passionate about multilingual learners, regardless of what subject they're learning. That is one of my big passions right now, to support those students at UNG. I have had a supplemental instructor at UNG since my first semester here. I teach one of our what we call sophomore gateway classes for the English major, which is English 2050, which is a grammar class. And that has tended to cause issues. There are people with grammar anxiety, much like math anxiety. And I was assigned a supplemental instructor and have loved the program from day one, that first semester. It makes all kinds of difference in the lives of the students. And so I'm thrilled to see that. I have actually also had a supplemental instructor in an English 1101 class. Works a little differently, but still highly beneficial. And then a couple of years ago, we added English 3050, which is the advanced second part of the grammar sequence required for our writing and publication, as well as future English teachers. It's part of the English Ed curriculum. And that has made a tremendous difference. So like Dr. Kitchings, I am very excited to see the program expand. In the past week, I have done 3 references for SI for the fall, and would like to have them all in my classes. So we'll see what happens.
I love that. Thank you. Dr. Harrison, do you want to end us out in our introductions?
Yeah, I can do that. Hey, I'm Tyler Harrison. I'm an associate professor here at the Dahlonega campus in the psychological science department. I am a cognitive psychologist by trade. Don't worry if you don't know what that is. That means I study memory, attention, perception, problem solving, decision making, as well as psycholinguistics. So, Miriam, we've got some things in common there.
Yep.
The classes that I teach here at UNG, I teach classes in cognitive psychology, obviously, but the class that I have my SI in is quantitative methods in psychology, which is a whole bunch of statistics geared for psychology majors, which you can imagine some of my students' anxiety. But one thing that really alleviates some of that anxiety and has helped out my class tremendously has been the supplemental instructors for that class. Very, very, very helpful. I've had a supplemental instructor for the past 3 semesters. I've lucked out and have had some fantastic supplemental instructors for that class. So I love who I'm paired with today. I'm very, very passionate about math. I'm actually married to a math major who does all kinds of statistics for Home Depot. So you can imagine the wonderful statistics pillow talk we have at home. And of course, connected to linguistics as well. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Great.
Thank you all so much for joining. I'm really excited to have this conversation as well. This episode is going to be titled, Is Easier Better? We will discuss the need to change perspective on learning and seeing challenges as opportunities. And since SI specifically supports courses that are historically challenging for students, this topic is something that we're especially invested in. In SI, we often hear that students say they highly consider ease or level of difficulty when choosing their major, which classes to take, whether to withdraw from a course. I know that as a student myself, word of mouth is really popular for asking students, hey, is this professor, have you taken them? Is this course easy or not? And also we're all familiar with Rate My Professor. That's also, so whether it's word of mouth or Rate My Professor, that question is always, is it easy? It's all pertaining to those kinds of topics. So in SI, we've seen that active engagement in learning, no matter the level of difficulty, leads to retention of course material. And we're interested to look at the faculty perspective of it if difficulty level of a course or specific area of study matter is especially willing to look at those questions like opposed to long-term as students continue their major level courses and post-graduation. So as a faculty, you have the opportunity to work with students taking introductory and major level courses within your department. Do you take a different approach when developing curriculum and teaching those intro versus major level courses? For example, do you consider the question, is it easy, or level of difficulty, those sorts of things?
So I'll give, it's going to be a mathematics perspective, but in mathematics, students develop a certain mathematical maturity over time, particularly those in the major, as their experiences increase and deepen within the subject. I think we have to investigate what we mean when we say something is easy. For example, some people will say things that are easy just because they can do it quickly. So do we mean something is easy if we can perform the task quickly, or do we mean something else? So a task could be considered relatively easy, yet still it could still take a considerable amount of time to complete that task. I think about a silly example, doing laundry, for example. That can be a laborious and time-consuming task, but it could also be considered easy, even if it's not a desirable task. So I think that word easy or easier is very loaded, and we we may not know what students mean when they ask is if something is easy. So in terms of this question, do we consider ease? Do I consider ease in curriculum development? I try to think of different questions other than that. I think when we're all developing curriculum or working curriculum development, the general approach is probably very similar. We begin by painting in broad strokes and ask, what do we want our students to know and be able to do when they finish the course? So in that sense, curriculum development, I would think is very similar regardless of the level of the course. I do think there tends to be a difference in the kinds of skills we want to see in our introductory level courses versus the skills we see in the major or upper division courses. I think Dr. Moore hinted at that a little bit in her introduction earlier about their courses. But so we have different goals in the introductory level courses, the gateway courses, you might say. But whether or not something is easy doesn't factor into that as much as what do I want them to know and what do I want them to be able to do. And so that's how I'm approaching the curriculum development. So I actually don't think very much at all about, is this going to be easy? Is this going to be difficult?
Totally agree. I don't think about the word ease. And I was going to pick up on what Dr. Kitchings said a minute ago about growth mindset being that's where I really want to think about in developing, especially for that sophomore grammar class that students have so much trouble with. Part of what I do at the beginning is just to help them understand that they know more about language than they think they do, in part because they've been told that grammar is a certain thing that it is generally, at least from a linguistics point of view, it is not. So what we want to do is kind of unlearn some of these negative associations that they have with grammar and their grammar experiences, and then begin to appreciate really the amazing depth of what they already can do. Many of my students are not only competent speakers of English, but of other languages. So what I want to help them understand is how amazing that skill is, and then to use that as a starting point for what is, a difficult subject, but let them see that they have a solid base from which to begin that. And then that, I hope, builds the confidence that they need to continue on with it. So Dr. Harrison, you were going to add something?
I was essentially going to say what you guys said in different words, but I'll, to get to Clay's first point, right? So Clay was first said, "What do we mean by difficulty?" And I think that that's a very good place to start off, because we can mean multiple things with difficulty, right? So maybe it's the case that the actual concepts that we're talking about in class are difficult to grasp, right? So like relativity in physics, very difficult to grasp. You can explain in many different ways. It's difficult, but we could also talk about the ease of the class in making an A, right? Because you could ask questions about relativity and pass in everybody in making an A. So what exactly do students mean here? I mean, I can think of some examples in graduate school where I had a class in structural equation modeling, which itself is a very difficult concept, but a pumpkin could pass that class with an A. And I've had some friends that are pumpkins that pass that class very much with an A. So I think that what students mean when they're talking about difficulty is less that the concepts themselves are difficult, although I do think that that plays a role, but more so the ratio of the amount of effort they spend in the class as to what their grade is going to be. Because I think, just like you guys with the growth mindset, they can put in enough time, anybody can pass whatever class it is. It'd be organic chemistry, it'd be calculus, whatever class. If they spend enough time with it, they'll end up making a good grade in it. But I think what students are wanting to know is, all I need to do is just this little itty bitty amount and I'll make an A, right? Or all I need to do is show up and I'll make a decent grade. I think that that's what they're getting at least for my discussions with students. Sarah, did you want to say something there?
Well, I was just going to say, I completely agree. I used to work in advising. I was an academic advisor, and I used to get this question all the time, helping students decide which classes to take. And the number one question they would ask me, well, is this easy? Is this professor easy? And I would just say, well, ease is relative, right? What's easy for me, I think algebra is easy. I didn't have to do a whole lot of work for that and made hundreds on everything. And and went about my day, but there are absolutely people who have to work hard. And so I don't necessarily think that even students understand what they mean by that question. Is this easy? Like, but I do agree with you, Dr. Harrison, that like, I think they're looking at it as what's the least amount of work that I can do to pass this class and make a good grade in this class. I don't know. It's a big question.
As a student, I will admit that I have had those questions in the past directed towards me, and I've asked like, oh, I just need an elective. Is this class easy kind of thing?
Yeah.
And as I ask those questions and as I've like experienced classes and professors and my classmates and stuff, I've seen that the ease is relative. It's what you think of as easy. So whenever I at least answer the question when people ask me, "Oh, is this course easy?" I take into account the curriculum and the way it's taught. Is it easy? Is it easy to understand? Is it easy to grasp? That's my view on how to, or at least how I answer that question, just my personal one. But I didn't think about at least I guess how professors consider ease and how they adapt that. You always think like, oh, they don't know. I'm gonna hide away. I don't think they know that we think these things. But y'all do, and I definitely like applaud y'all that y'all do kind of put us, even our best interest, even though we don't feel like it's our best interest, that y'all put that ahead and make sure that we're being educated, not even on we're being educated on the subject, but we're also being educated on how to go about these courses and how to learn effectively and bring it into our everyday lives. Thank you for answering that. That was really interesting to hear y'all's thoughts on that. And leading from that, sometimes those challenges of, when we are pushed to our limits in courses, sometimes those challenges can prompt change. And whether that be in our academic career or our personal life, or even just habits, it can be important to change the perspective at times. What are y'all's thoughts on seeing challenges as opportunities, or do you have any tips on changing your mindset to help students see challenges as opportunities? Dr. Harrison, do you want to start us out?
Oh, I can. So I'm a memory guy. I do a lot of research in memory. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart. And in the field of memory, we have a concept called desirable difficulties. And the idea is that the more difficult retrieval of a memory is, the better it is that you're going to remember that thing for a long period of time, right? So a lot of times students want retrieval and for tests and stuff to be extraordinarily easy when you'll know it for that test. But if I ask you 2 days from now, you're not going to know it. I mean, a great example of this in cognitive psychology is the example of the spacing effect. So if you're studying for a test, maybe you could study a little bit today, a little bit tomorrow, a little bit the next day, and you see how well you do on the test. Or you could cram 8 hours the night before. For the test next day, guess what? Both of them work just as well. You do just as well cramming as you do studying a little bit. However, if you want to remember something for a longer period of time, you want to know it 4 years down the road, 10 years down the road, into your 80s, spaced studying has been shown to be much, much more proficient. But that's something that's very, very difficult for one, students to have the self-control to do, and two, that's something that they actively despise. So one thing that I do in my class that doesn't get me a lot of love is I have cumulative finals, right? And you can see the reactions on everybody's face. That is a horrible thing to do. How dare Dr. Harrison do that to his poor students and make them have cumulative finals? The purpose behind that is so that they're having to retrieve information all the way from the beginning of the class. And even though that's a huge pain, in the long run, it really helps their long-term memory. So I'm only answering a bit of your question, I believe. But I think that this difficulty concept, making things difficult, forcing them to do things might be better for the long-term retention and for students to be able to apply this information, not just at the end of the class, but for the next class that they have, to when they get their job, to when they are, 80 years old. I think that's one of the goals that we have as educators.
I would like to point out real quick, because I want to hear other people's thoughts on this, but that's exactly what SI is trying to do. We're trying to get students to work on things little bits at a time, as opposed to encouraging that cramming. So if they can just give a little bit of time throughout the semester, how much more successful will they be long-term, right? So I just wanted to point that out. I love that.
And can I throw something in there that supports that,
Absolutely.
Sarah?
Yes.
I teach the 2050, so that initial grammar class is in the fall, and so is the second course in the sequence. It's a fall course. So when I have the same students, I have them a fall, I don't see them in the spring, and then I have them the following fall. And what I have noticed, it's anecdotal, there's no statistics that I can support this, but the students who are in my 2050 who are actively involved in SI, not only do they do better in 2050, but when they hit 3050 and we do the first week of review, I don't hear that, oh my gosh, I can't remember anything we studied. Instead, I hear this, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember when we did this analysis diagramming section with our SI. The difference, I think, is noticeable and remarkable. And that's something I do like to point out to the students. Now, although I'm going to use Tyler's spacing principle to justify it as well, that attendance in SI is building up that skill over time so that when they hit 3050 a year later, it's going to stick with them.
Well, another thing that it's doing, Miriam, I think, is it's teaching them how to learn better.
Yes,
it's instilling those habits,
right,
of higher quality learning. And so I see that as I see the same things that you do in mathematics. I could go on and on about SI. I want to, and so I'm having trouble constraining my thoughts. But to speak again to the seeing challenges as opportunities. I feel like there's a lot of temptation for us all, not just our students, to try to take the easy way out of things. We want instant gratification, and I'll see a lot of students who will work 1 minute on a math problem and not make progress and throw in the towel. So, how do we? And that's another thing that SI can do. It helps encourage perseverance. Mm-hmm. Along with that growth mindset comes the idea of, I must persevere in this and not throw in the towel. And so I think a lot of people are afraid of challenging themselves because they're so convinced that they're going to fail, and they're convinced they're going to find out that they are a failure. So they associate a failed opportunity. They incorrectly associate that with their identity as who they are as a person. I am a failure versus this opportunity was not successful. And so they're getting wrapped up in that identity. And this is something that I tell my students. I'm very open about this on my own challenge. I don't know if they receive it the way I intend it. I hope they do. I hope it's helpful. But we can think if we get a door closed, a failure, if you will, a lot of times we think that means we have to quit everything and go weep and wail over in the corner. But if we fail miserably, as I did in the fall of 2001, so I'm aging myself a little bit in my undergraduate career, fall of 2001, I failed a course called Abstract Algebra, as if it wasn't abstract already, right? So I was graduating December of 01. I signed a contract to teach math at a high school in January of 02. So the day before graduation, they posted grades. You remember when they would post grades by your social security number on their office door? Well, I went and found my social security number, and I saw that I didn't pass. I had never failed a college course in my life. I knew it was a possibility, but I thought, no, he's gonna pass me. Well, that was unbelievably humiliating. I'm probably taking way too much time with this. My apologies, but so it was humiliating. I had to call my family and say, please don't come to graduation tomorrow because I'm not graduating. And I share this with my students because they will often say, oh, I've got to get an A in this class, or I've got to pull my grade up. I just look at them and say, you're talking to the wrong person here because I have walked this road and it was extremely painful. I mean, I had to go another semester. I had to call the school system where I was going to start teaching and humbly say, I can't do it because I failed. So that was just humiliating. But I said, okay, I have no choice. I must do this course. I had to take the course. So the next semester, the spring semester, I found 2 other people, and we created our own little huddle. These other 2 also had history with this course. We started from day 1 in the professor's office hours. I'm talking day 1 of the semester, Monday. We said, when are your office hours? And he said, well, you mean you want to start today? Yes. So we went every time his door was open. We annoyed him to death, I'm sure. But he was so kind and gracious. He taught us that we could learn the material, but we also learned that perseverance matters. And getting through that, if as strange as it sounds, I treasure that failure. And I tell my students that. So that was a failure, but I am grateful for that because of all that I learned through that semester, not just about abstract algebra, but about what it means to persevere through things, to take ownership of my situation. And these are also things that I think SI does. I think it encourages those types of habits. And again, I've spoken way too long, so I'll close it down for that one. But I do share that story with students, and I hope that it helps them.
And I've got to jump in on this because this I think is so interesting. I'm involved in a study right now. We're doing a linguistic analysis of positioning and stance in student reflections. And so I collected my data from the students in the advanced grammar class at 4 different points during the semester. They reflected on the work they were doing, tests, exercises, etc. And what I found interesting, Clay, it confirms exactly what you said. At the beginning of the semester, their language choices show that they see themselves as the cause of the difficulties, because most of them will hit a huge challenge about 1 month into the class, and they position themselves as the problem through the language choices. It's not the class, it's not the material, it's me. And you can see that in the way that they frame those reflections. And they suggest, and all of them will say, I did well in 2050, therefore I should be good at grammar. I'm having a problem. Something's wrong with me. Something is wrong with me. But what I noticed is that by the end, again, it was, I went to SI, I worked with my peers, I went to Dr. Moore's office, I did this, and they began to position themselves, okay, maybe I don't get grammar all the way in terms of linguistic analysis, but boy, I can do so much more than I thought I could. I have made such progress. This is a good thing. And I think it's fascinating that what you just said plays out in the actual ways they use language in their reflections. And we can see changes. Haven't fully gotten that analyzed all the way, but that's our initial analysis, what we're seeing going on. So I think it's cool that you said that.
I love that, because I also think that it really highlights, like, they're learning so much more than just the material. Yeah. Like, they're learning, like Dr. Kitching, that was something that that stuck with you and has stuck with you all these years later. And you'll probably tell that story throughout your teaching career, because that's something that it made an impact on you, right? And so sometimes I think that's that piece of seeing challenges as opportunities that our students don't necessarily see right away. Is that like, I'm learning more here. Like, this challenge is, I can learn from this. And that goes back to growth mindset. I think, Dr. Harrison, it goes back to like what you were saying, with like that long-term knowledge, right? They're not just learning about quantitative methods, but they're learning the skills that they need in order to be successful at quantitative methods, but also in other things and other areas. And so I just think that's such an important piece, I think, in the learning process overall. And so I'm really curious how y'all, as educators, communicate the importance of that big picture or long-term impact of education and learning with your students.
There was an easy way to do that. I almost think that my experience has been students do not realize that what I am telling them is important, or that it will improve the quality of their lives or make sense for their job until they move on to the next step. I will get emails all the time from students in graduate school that are like, yeah, that statistics thing you taught me about, I didn't think it was going to be important, but now I am the leader of my study group here, and I am very thankful for what you taught me.
Dr. Harrison.
And during the class, that never happens. I just had another a student of mine pass me in the hall the other day, and he was like, yo, that quantitative method stuff is very helpful in my class that I'm having right now. And I'm like, I know, I told you. I think I shout at students about the importance of these things until I'm blue in the face, and they will never recognize it until the next step. So, I mean, maybe I could be doing something better. But I think a lot of these things, students, human beings in general, I don't want to just call it students, the skills and techniques that you need to have at the next stage of life, oftentimes you don't know. And even if someone is directly telling you these things, sometimes you might not necessarily believe them, you know?
Yeah. It's so funny that you say that, and just have to throw this in here. I remember in Sydney's year past SI, her first semester, with you as her SI, and I was having a check-in with her, and she said, I was asking her how it was going. She was like, I was so scared to do this because like quant methods was just not my favorite class overall, but that's what we put her in. And she was like, I can't tell you how grateful I am that I'm in this again, because now I understand why it's important. So I agree with that.
As a student, I definitely can say that I've had those moments where in the moment I'm like, I can't, this is just too much. But then after leaving the course and going to an upper level course, or even going to a different one and just taking those lessons I've learned, I have multiple occasions went to a professor's office hours while they're not my professor anymore, and just praise them because the lessons and even the course material sometimes, I know it doesn't sound applicable, but like I'm a communications major, so I remember I still take lessons that I learned in college algebra and apply it to communications. Just I guess communicating with the material and learning how to go about it, to work out equations. Even though you're interacting with that course material, it can kind of translate to everyday life. But I have definitely had those moments where, and I'm sure I will have them here on out, but it's important to definitely go back and thank your predecessors of teaching and learning everything that you can. So on behalf of your students, I thank you, because I know that there's plenty that are not coming forward.
I think the big picture of long-term impact is when I have the earlier courses, introductory courses, maybe terminal math course, of college algebra even, I try to paint the big picture of this is training in reasoning And I'll, whether it's good or bad, I don't know. So I'll hesitate to admit it, but sometimes I'll even poke fun at certain problems and say, oh, I'm sure you're now, you can sleep much better tonight now that you know how to write a logarithmic function in exponential form. And, I'll poke fun at it a little bit, but then I'll bring it back and say, right, but what are we really doing here? We're really learning a language and how to reason from one language to another. And so I try to keep those things in focus for students to help them, because I've never had someone where I gave them an actual math application of a certain math topic, and then they sit back and go, oh, you know what? Now that you've shared that example, I'm fully on board now. I've just never had that happen. So I think there are bigger issues and things like, Tyler, metacognition, being aware of your learning that I want them to take with them, even more so than the math content. In some ways, that math content is an excuse to strengthen those other abilities that you have, especially in the earlier math courses.
And I love the idea too, that one of the things that SIs do is that I think they can give the perspective that the information is useful and perhaps be a little bit more believable than I am as a 50-something instructor. They will hear that. One of my favorite things this past year that I've had the opportunity to watch is a young woman who was in my 2050 class that very first semester I taught at UNG. A year later, she was my SI for 2050. A year later, she was my SI for 3050. She went on to do the MAT in English program here. And as a grad assistant for me, she was the first UNG student to present at the American Association of Applied Linguistics. And she's just started a job where she is working with technical communications in online learning, but she was just asked to present a linguistic analysis of the speech patterns in some of the instructors she's working with. And she wrote me an email today and she said, Dr. Moore, you would not believe this, but I'm doing 2050 content in this job with engineers. It's great. And I thought that communicates far more than anything I could for the 2050 students. And so having those kind of testimonials from the SIs who've been through the process and come back, I think is really, really helpful.
I talk with my students when I talk about statistics about the Whitney Smith question, which is named after a student that was in my middle school and high school that we went through together, that in every single math class we ever shared, which was all of them, she would ask the math teacher, so when am I going to use this in real life? Okay. And she kind of said it like that. And sometimes the teachers did a good job answering that question, and sometimes they didn't. But math has a very interesting habit of becoming relevant later on in life. In 8th grade, we talked about matrices, and we talked about finding the determinants and the inverse of matrices. And Whitney Smith said, hey, when are we going to need to use this in our life? And the teacher did not know. So fast forward, high school, never touched matrices. Undergrad, never touched matrices. Grad school, last year of my grad school, I take a class and there are some matrices. I got to find the determinants of them and I got to find the inverses of them. So that stuff will come back to you. You never know when some of these foundational skills, these logarithms, matrix math, that will come into play when you least expect it.
Y'all are amazing. I love all of this feedback. I'm definitely learning a lot. Y'all have covered a few things just related to your passive moments where you've had an aha moment. And one of SI's slogans is facilitating the lightbulb moments. It's what this podcast is named after. This means we look forward to reaching those moments with students and ourselves where the light bulb turns on and something monumental clicks into place. With that, has there been a light bulb moment in your personal life, in your career, that has led you to where you are now?
I went into grad school thinking I was going to be a theoretical linguist. I mean, that was my thing. I was going to be a syntactician, the next Chomsky, that was going to be me. Chomsky's no longer that big deal. But back then, I started grad school in 1988. So that gives you, I'm ancient. But what happened in grad school, my degree was going to be in linguistics, and they said to me, you're a teaching assistant. We have sections of freshman composition that are sheltered only for international multilingual writers, and we usually let linguistics grad students teach them. Would you like to do that? Sure. When I walked into that class, within a week of teaching writing for international students, I found where I was at home. I loved it. There was nothing I loved more than talking language and working with these students who were trying to figure out how to express themselves in English. And I realized that the pedagogy and the theoretical linguistics had merge points, and that I didn't need to be cooped up in a laboratory anywhere necessarily, doing experiments about language, but never actually interacting with language users to be a linguist. And so I fell in love with teaching in that classroom. And I actually got a letter it was last fall, from a student I had as a graduate TA, who wrote me a letter and said he was still using things that we did in that classroom. Now he teaches engineering at the University of British Columbia. That was, to me, just such a confirmation. It was such an aha moment that pedagogy and theory don't have to be disconnected.
I think for me, I had a very fixed mindset about my career, and I thought that getting a graduate degree, much less PhD, was so foreign and not a possibility for me. And I came back to my undergraduate institution while I was teaching high school and did a small presentation on some technology. And the man who ended up being my major professor talked me into applying to the master's degree program there. And I thought at the time, I can't do that. That's for, quote unquote, that's for the smart people. So such a fixed mindset, and he wouldn't have it. Long story short, I got accepted and started thinking, what's wrong with my thoughts, and two, I have to just go for broke here, and I have to pursue. So I think that was a big deal for me.
I can think about a few, but one of the big ones is all through high school, whenever I had my science courses, I despised them. They essentially were the teacher would put stuff on the overhead projector and we would copy it down, and then that was it. That was the science class. So biology was, memorizing parts of the Krebs cycle and the citric acid cycle, which, as you probably are aware, are not the most entertaining parts of biology. So I really had like this block in my head that science was awful and a bunch of memorization. So fast forward to my first year in undergrad, and I have a class in experimental and statistical methods in psychology, which is my favorite class that I've ever had in the existence of all my classes. I know it sounds awful, but I had a class with a professor named Charles Brewer, who the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, has a teaching award, and it's called the Charles Brewer Award, named after him because he was that badass. This guy teaching was an art. Seeing him up there, it was a mixture of a play, stand-up comedian, and just the interaction that he had up there and getting you to think about things really left a mark on me, wanting me to be a professor and wanting to be a teacher as well. I think that was very important, but also showing me that science wasn't just something stuffy. Science could answer a lot of practical questions for things that we care about in our everyday lives. So that's one, but good.
Thank y'all for sharing. I definitely love hearing all of these aha moments or the light bulb moments. It almost seems like a drive for everyone. And I'm only speaking for myself when I say this, but I always feel the power behind those stories. I feel the aha, and it makes me want to keep going. Just even though I've probably will never take that course, Dr. Harrison, I know that I probably could with that story. So thank you for sharing. But I just want to thank all of you for joining us on this podcast. I've definitely had some enlightening conversation through this. And I just want to thank Dr. Harrison, Dr. Moore, and Dr. Kitchings, and also our special guest, Miss Sarah Dean, for joining us, as well as our audience. Thank you for listening. And we hope to see you next time. Good luck with finals. And we will see you on the next episode. Thank you.